The night of September 3, 1939, was suffocating in the Polish forest near the German border, the air thick with pine resin and the distant rumble of artillery. Corporal Janek Kowalski, a Polish signals officer, crouched in a shallow trench, his uniform mud-caked, his face gaunt under a steel helmet. His fingers, trembling from cold and fear, clutched a leather satchel containing stolen Enigma cipher machine components, rotors, wires, and a partial code book snatched from a German outpost hours earlier. Around him, his unit, 5 men, all that remained of their signals team, huddled in the trench, their breath visible in the chilly air. Private Marek, a wiry radio man, fiddled with a battered radio set, its dials flickering uselessly. Sergeant Nowak, his greatcoat torn and a bandage wrapped around his bloodied hand, scanned the tree line with a Mauser rifle. The others, Privates Duda, Zielinski, and the young cryptographer Witek, gripped their rifles, their eyes darting to the shadows where German searchlights swept the forest. Their mission was simple but deadly: deliver the Enigma components to a British intelligence contact at a rendezvous point 20 miles east, across a landscape crawling with Wehrmacht patrols. The trench, hastily dug under cover of darkness, offered little protection, its walls slick with mud and roots. The ground shook as a German bomber roared overhead, its silhouette black against the moonless sky. Janek's heart pounded, his hands tightening on the satchel, the weight of the machine's secrets heavier than the metal inside. A faint hum, not mechanical but eerie, drifted through the trees like a whisper from the earth itself. Marek froze, his radio crackling with static that sounded almost like voices, fragmented and foreign. Nowak hissed, his bandage unraveling as he gestured for silence. The hum grew louder, weaving into a low chant, as if the forest itself was speaking. Janek's skin prickled. He'd heard stories from villagers, tales of these woods, cursed by centuries of bloodshed, where the dead lingered, their voices guiding the lost to their doom. Superstition, he'd thought, born of war's exhaustion. But now, with the hum turning into murmurs that seemed to cool his name, those stories felt like warnings. Marek's radio sputtered the static forming words in German. "See coming. They're coming." The first turning point came with a snap of twigs in the darkness. A German patrol, their jackboots crunching on pine needles, emerged from the fog, their MP-40 submachine guns glinting under searchlight beams. Janek's unit flattened against the trench walls, their breaths held, the Enigma satchel pressed into the mud beneath him. The radio, still in Marek's hands, let out a piercing screech, betraying their position. Nowak cursed under his breath, his bandaged hand gripping his rifle as he signaled to hold fire. The patrol paused, their voices sharp and guttural, their flashlight beams slicing through the trees, inches from the trench. Janek's fingers dug into the satchel, his pulse racing as the murmurs in the forest grew louder, overlapping with the Germans' orders, as if mocking them. Marek, trembling, fumbled to silence the radio, but it was too late. A German shout rang out, followed by the crack of gunfire. Bullets tore into the trench, spraying mud and splintering roots. Duda screamed, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his uniform, a fresh wound staining his sleeve. Nowak fired back, his Mauser's report echoing through the forest, dropping one German. The others scattered, their searchlights swinging wildly, but the murmurs grew into a wail, a chorus of voices that seemed to rise from the ground, drowning out the gunfire. Janek scrambled to his feet, the satchel slung across his chest, and signaled to move. The unit stumbled from the trench, dragging Duda, whose face was pale with pain, his blood leaving a trail in the mud. They ran through the forest, branches clawing at their faces, the ground uneven and slick. The German patrol's shouts faded, but the voices followed, now clear, speaking in Polish, German, and all the tongues Janek couldn't place. "Join us," they whispered, their words curling into his mind. Marek, still clutching the radio, muttered prayers, his hands shaking as the static pulsed in time with the voices. Nowak led the way, his bandage now soaked, blood dripping onto his rifle. The forest seemed alive, its shadows twisting into shapes, tall, thin figures with hollow eyes, flickering at the edge of vision. Janek blinked, and they were gone, but the chill in his bones remained. The second turning point came at a clearing, where a bombed-out farmhouse stood, its walls charred and roof collapsed, surrounded by craters filled with stagnant water reflecting the faint red glow of distant flares. Witek, the cryptographer, collapsed, his leg gashed by shrapnel from an earlier skirmish, the wound now oozing through a makeshift bandage. The Enigma components were critical, but Witek carried the only complete codebook memorized in his head, vital for decoding German transmissions. Janek knelt beside him, torn between saving the man and protecting the mission. Nowak's eyes were hard, his bandaged hand gripping his rifle as he scanned the tree line. "Leave him," he whispered, but Janek shook his head, slinging Witek's arm over his shoulder. The voices grew louder, chanting "Stay," as if the forest itself were demanding a sacrifice. They carried Witek into the farmhouse ruins, its interior a maze of broken beams and ash, the air thick with the smell of burnt wood and blood. Marek set up the radio, its dials spinning uselessly, the static now a cacophony of voices, some pleading, some commanding. Zielinski stood guard at the doorway, his rifle trembling as he stared into the fog. The German patrol was closing in, their flashlight beams slicing through the trees, but the voices were louder, more insistent, coming from the walls, the floor, the earth itself. Janek noticed the shadows on the charred walls, shapes that didn't match the men, their arms too long, their eyes too empty. He blinked, and they vanished, but Witek's fevered muttering echoed the voices. "They're here." The climax came as the Germans breached the clearing, their gunfire shattering the farmhouse's remains. Nowak fired back, his bandaged hand slipping on the rifle, his shots wild but defiant. Janek dragged Witek behind a collapsed wall, the satchel pressed against his chest, its contents rattling. The voices became a deafening wail, no longer whispers but a chorus of anguish, speaking names, dates, battles, long forgotten. Marek's radio exploded in static, the voices now screaming through it. "Join us." Zielinski fired his rifle until it clicked empty, then swung it like a club, his face contorted with terror. A German grenade landed nearby, its explosion shaking the ground, sending ash and debris raining down. Janek shielded Witek, his hands bloodied, the satchel's leather tearing under the strain. The shadows moved, no longer confined to the walls but stepping into the room, figures in tattered uniforms, their faces half gone, their hands reaching through the smoke. Janek fired his pistol, the shots deafening, but the figures didn't fall. They pressed closer, their touch like ice, burning through his gloves. Nowak shouted for Janek to run, to save the satchel, but the voices were inside his head, pulling at his thoughts, his memories. He saw his village, his sister's face, then nothing but the forest, endless and hungry. Marek was dragged into the darkness, his prayers cut off by a gurgle. Zielinski fell, his rifle clattering, his eyes wide with terror. Nowak stood his ground, firing until his rifle jammed, then vanished into the smoke. Janek didn't know how he survived. Dawn broke, gray and weak, the forest silent except for the distant rumble of artillery. He lay sprawled in a crater, alone, his uniform torn, his hands bloodied from clutching the satchel. The farmhouse was gone, reduced to ash and rubble, the German patrol nowhere in sight. Witek was dead, his body slumped nearby, his eyes open but unseeing, the codebook lost with him. The satchel, miraculously intact, lay beside Janek, its Enigma components glinting faintly in the dawn light. In the mud he found a single dog tag, Nowak's, its edges singed as if touched by fire. He staggered to his feet, the satchel slung across his chest, its weight a burden heavier than the war itself. The forest stretched around him, its trees skeletal against the sky, their branches like fingers waiting to grasp. The voices were gone, but the silence was worse, a void that carried their echo. Janek walked toward the rendezvous point, the satchel's contents rattling with each step, a reminder of the cost. The forest watched, its shadows still, but he felt their gaze, a presence that would follow him beyond the war. As he reached the edge of the trees, the wind stirred, carrying a faint whisper, not his name, but a single word, Enigma. The cratered ground stretched behind him, bloodied and quiet, but the forest was not empty. Janek clutched the satchel tighter, his breath ragged, and stepped into the open, the dog tag heavy in his pocket. The war raged on, but the voices he knew would never truly leave.